My parents drove off while I was still standing in the rain, my 12-year-old hands gripping a damp $20 bill. My dad's last words to me through the rolling window weren't, "I love you," or "Be safe." They were, "You're 12 now, Paige. Grow up and find your own way home." For 19 years, I kept my promise and never spoke a single word to either of them again. I rebuilt my life from scratch, buried the past, and became a woman who needed nobody. But yesterday, a thick cream envelope arrived in my mailbox, an invitation to my younger brother's high society wedding, and taped to the back was a handwritten note from my mother containing 5 words that proved they hadn't changed at all. "It's time to come home." If you're watching, comment the city you're tuning in from so I can see how far my story travels. My name is Paige Mercer, and I'm 31 years old. Looking at me today, a successful architect living in a high-rise downtown, you'd never guess that my life's defining moment happened at a dimly lit gas station off Highway 50. I was 12 years old and rain was pouring down in sheets, blurring the red neon sign of the mini-mart. Inside the car, a petty argument had been escalating for over an hour. It started over something stupid, a spilled drink on the backseat upholstery, but with my parents, petty grievances always mutated into cruel punishments. My father slammed the brakes, turning the sedan into the flooded parking lot 80 miles away from our home. "Get out," my mother said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. I thought it was a scare tactic, but as I stepped onto the wet asphalt, my father rolled down his window just enough to toss a damp $20 bill onto the ground. "You're 12 now, Paige," he cold-heartedly spat out. "Grow up and find your own way home." Before I could even speak, the tire spun, spraying murky water over my sneakers. I stood there frozen, watching the red taillights of our family car fade into the blackness of the storm. They had actually done it. They had abandoned their 12-year-old daughter in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no coat, and $20. The rain felt like needles against my skin as the cold soaked straight through my clothes. Panic clawed at my chest, telling me to run down the highway after the vanishing taillights. But logic, a sharp, sudden instinct born of survival, overrode the terror. Running onto a pitch-black highway in a torrential downpour would get me killed. I scanned the deserted gas station lot. The main office was locked up tight for the night. Down the alley beside an adjacent diner, I spotted a massive metal dumpster shielded under a rusted metal overhang. It was filthy, but it was dry. I crouched behind the heavy plastic bins, pulling my knees up to my chest and wrapping my arms around myself to stem the violent shivering. I spent hours in that dark corner, listening to the rain rattle against the tin roof. Every set of headlights that swept across the pavement made my heart leap. For a fraction of a second, I thought they'd come back. But as midnight came and went, the brutal reality settled in. They weren't coming back. They had left me to test me, to break me, or simply because they didn't care. Around 4 in the morning, the diner's back door creaked open. A middle-aged woman in a stained apron stepped out with a bag of trash. When she saw a terrified, drenched 12-year-old huddled in the grime, she didn't scream or call the police right away. Her name was Martha. She brought me inside, wrapped me in a warm blanket, and set a steaming mug of hot chocolate in front of my trembling hands. As Martha gently tried to piece together what had happened, something hardened inside me. The fear died, replaced by a cold, impenetrable resolve. I realized then that relying on the people who were supposed to protect me was a death sentence. Sitting on that vinyl booth stool shivering under Martha's warm blanket, I made a silent vow. I would survive this night, I would grow up fast, and I would never, ever let my parents hold power over my life again. Martha called the authorities that morning, marking the beginning of my long journey through the child welfare system. My parents, terrified of the legal consequences once police got involved, claimed I was a troubled, rebellious runaway who had sprinted into the night. But the evidence, a 12-year-old child abandoned 80 miles from home with no coat, told the real story. The court severed their custody, and I entered the foster care system. Instead of letting the trauma consume me, I channeled every ounce of anger into absolute focus. I threw myself into academics, treating school as my only guaranteed ticket to freedom. While other teenagers were hanging out or worrying about high school drama, I was studying late into the night, maintaining a perfect GPA, and taking college prep courses. When I turned 18, I aged out of foster care with nothing to my name but a beat-up duffel bag and a mountain of determination. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously, working the early shift at a coffee shop, grading papers at the university library, and cleaning offices at night to pay my way through a rigorous architecture program. I couldn't afford to fail. I had no safety net, no family home to fall back on if I stumbled. By the time I hit 31, that relentless drive had built an unshakable life. I was a senior associate at a leading architecture firm, owned my downtown apartment, and answered to no one. For 19 long years, I kept my vow. I never reached out, never looked back, and completely erased my parents from my world. The quiet sanctuary I'd built for 19 years shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home from the office, poured a glass of water, and began sorting through the Daily Mail. Among the bills and promotional flyers was a heavy square envelope made of thick cream-colored cardstock. Gold foil lettering gleamed across the front, displaying my full name and current address. It was a wedding invitation. My younger brother, Julian, was getting married. He had been a toddler sitting in a high chair when my parents abandoned me at that gas station, too young to understand why his big sister vanished overnight. Over the years, I had often wondered about him, wondering if our parents' cold transactional nature had ruined his childhood the way it had destroyed mine. Now, holding his high society wedding invitation to an exclusive country club estate, it seemed he had grown up inside their wealthy, polished bubble. I flipped the heavy envelope over, and my breath caught in my throat. Taped to the back flap was a small index card, written in a sharp, familiar handwriting I recognized instantly. It was my mother's script. There was no apology, no explanation for 19 years of total silence, no acknowledgement of the 12-year-old girl they left in the rain. Instead, there were just 5 arrogant, demanding words written in black ink. "It's time to come home." Anger, hot and sharp, surged through my chest. They hadn't sent this invitation out of guilt or remorse. To them, my absence was simply an unfinished piece of family business that needed to be neatly wrapped up for a high-profile public event. They expected me to fall in line, dress up, and play the part of the long-lost daughter to keep up appearances. I didn't wait for the wedding ceremony. I knew how my parents operated in large crowds. They would surround themselves with shields of fake laughter and polite conversation. If I wanted answers on my own terms, I needed to strike when they least expected it. The night before the main event, I pulled up to the country club where the rehearsal dinner was being held. Rain was falling lightly against my windshield, a poetic twist of fate that wasn't lost on me. I stepped out of my car, dressed in an elegant tailored navy suit, looking every bit the confident 31-year-old architect I had become. I was no longer the helpless, terrified child in soaked sneakers. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. Inside, 30 members of our extended family and high society friends were mingling around crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements. My mother, holding a glass of champagne, turned toward the entrance. The moment her eyes locked onto mine, her glass visibly trembled. My father, standing beside her in a bespoke tuxedo, froze mid-sentence. They didn't see a broken victim crawling back for forgiveness. They saw a ghost from their past walking tall and completely unbothered. "Paige," my mother gasped, her voice losing its practiced composure as relatives began turning to look. "You actually came. I received your note," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "You said it was time to come home, but I think you forgot something very important, Mom." My father stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he tried to exert his old authority. Paige, this is not the time or place for a scene. Show some respect. I let out a soft, cold laugh that cut right through his command. Respect? You left a 12-year-old girl at an abandoned gas station, 80 miles away, in a downpour with $20 and told her to grow up. You don't get to demand respect. Gasps echoed through the room as family members stared in utter shock, their polished facade crumbling in seconds. Before my parents could scramble to repair the damage or offer another weak excuse, a voice broke through the shocked silence. She's telling the truth, Julian said, stepping forward from the head table. He looked so much like the little boy I remembered, yet standing tall in his groom's suit, he possessed an air of quiet gravity. He walked past our parents, completely ignoring their frantic warning glances, and stood directly in front of me. I was only 3 when you disappeared, Paige, Julian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. For years, Mom and Dad told me you ran away because you were troubled and hated our family. But when I turned 16, I found an old police report hidden in Dad's filing cabinet. I realized then what they had actually done to you. A heavy silence descended over the room. The extended family, uncles, aunts, and cousins, who had spent nearly 2 decades believing I was a rebellious runaway, looked at my parents with disgust and disbelief. The narrative my parents had carefully constructed to protect their reputation was shattered beyond repair. I sent you that invitation, Paige, Julian continued, reaching out to gently take my hands. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago to find your address. Mom found out and insisted on adding her own note, thinking she could force a happy family reunion for my wedding photos. But I didn't want their fake reunion, I just wanted my sister back. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes as I looked at the brother I thought I had lost forever. He hadn't grown up to be like them. Beneath their roof, surrounded by their lies, he had still retained his humanity and searched for the truth. My mother tried one last desperate maneuver, stepping forward with tears welling in her eyes. Julian, please, Paige, we did what we thought was best back then. It was tough love. Can't we put the past behind us for your brother's big day? I looked at her, then at my father, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. For 19 years, I had carried the weight of that rainy night, wondering why I wasn't enough for them to love, why I was so easily discarded. But looking at them now, shrunk down by their own exposed deceit, surrounded by the quiet judgment of their peers, I realized something profound. I didn't need their apology, I didn't need their validation, and I certainly didn't need their version of family. You didn't give me tough love, I said, my voice steady and free of anger. You abandoned a child, but that 12-year-old girl survived without you, built a life without you, and became a woman who owes you nothing. I turned back to Julian and gave his hands a warm, reassuring squeeze. I won't stay for the dinner or the wedding, Julian. This room is full of ghosts I left behind a long time ago. But my door is always open to you whenever you want to build a real relationship away from all of this. I'll be waiting. Julian smiled through his tears and nodded. I'll call you tomorrow. I walked out of that country club into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving behind clear skies and a fresh breeze. As I got back into my car and started the engine, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. The past no longer held any power over me. If you were in my shoes, would you have given them a second chance, or walked away for good?